Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this series of cybersecurity webinars partnered with Cisco Systems. So last week, we covered current threat landscape with Cisco Talos, a threat research organization within Cisco Systems. And for those who missed this informative sessions, we have provided the link in the WebEx chat window, so for you to review it later on when you have time. As we know that the threat landscape is currently changing, and it changes daily, it is very challenging to keep playing whack-a-mole when it comes to defending and protecting our intellectual properties. And it is not a simple solution and technology that can provide a set and forget model, especially with a limited amount of in-house staff members. So therefore, a proper security framework can definitely help us to strategically place the key components in the network to defend against these unknown threats. So here we are. We talked about, we've heard of the ZeroTrust Framework and and a lot of people have heard of different things about it, depending on who you talk to, and ZeroTrust Framework can be a very complex solution. So we're here to break it down into 3 different sessions, which include workforce, workplace, and workload. Today, we're only covering the workforce component, and we will have 2 other sessions in the following 2 weeks, every Wednesday, that we're going to cover workplace and workload. So today, we have Aaron Torres and Aaron Hansen from Cisco Systems to discuss what is the ZeroTrust Framework for workforce. So Aaron?
Yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Just want to make sure really quick that you guys can see my screen just fine. Paul?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect.
We can see it.
Thank you. So guys, let me do a really quick introduction of myself and Aaron. Obviously, we're not brothers, but I really wish we were. Aaron's a really good guy. We're both located out of Austin, but I am Aaron Torres. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm one of the cybersecurity gurus, I guess you could say, here at Cisco. We cover a lot of our featured partners, such as DataVox. I've been in the security industry for a very long time, back in the days where it was Cabletron, Bay Networks, and a lot of times my first introduction into security wasn't on the defensive side. It was really on the offensive side. I was doing a lot with phreaking and phone systems, and did a lot of research and a lot of analytics on security at a very young age. So I was very happy to be able to take that approach and kind of learn from an offensive point of view into the industry. But Aaron Hansen, do you mind taking a quick minute introducing yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Aaron. So this is Aaron Hansen. I am a technology alliance manager here at Duo, now part of Cisco. I joined Cisco as part of the Duo acquisition. I was at Duo roughly a year before we got acquired, and really excited to be part of the Cisco family of security offerings. As Aaron and I will talk about this morning, it really gives us a much more a broader portfolio of solutions to be able to allow you to implement a zero trust infrastructure. So look forward to the conversation this morning.
Yep. And Aaron and I, if you guys don't mind, we'll tag team a lot of this conversation and webinar today. We've done it together in many other places, even internationally, like Colombia, Cartagena. So we really do enjoy this particular topic, and let me kind of mention why. Zero trust for me personally is such an important part of any ecosystem that you have with any vendor or really any product that you may have out there, which is such an exciting thing for me, because going back 20 years, I'm an old man, so going back 20 years ago, 25 or whatever it might be, when I looked at networks, the only thing I cared about was, how do I build a network? To me, if someone would say, hey, help me build a network, and would build the server, it'd be a Windows server or a Linux machine or Sun Microsystems machine or whatever. You have a hub or a switch or whatever it might be, and you plug computers in, and there was your network, right? And in those days, the only people that really could afford security or even knew what security was were banks, right? People that had large budgets that need to be proactive. And then at the time I worked for an ISP that did a lot of dial-up and so on. So I worked a lot with port Livingston's, Ascend, Max TNTs, and they needed firewalls. And oddly enough, they used those firewalls for out-of-bound management, and now started introducing VPN for remote management. But never really thought about using it in line unless I need a NAT, or a lot of times they use a NAT on routers just to be able not to use public IP addresses, right? So, but point being is how we look at security from then to now really has changed a lot. Now people are not scared of putting firewalls in line because of slowness or performance issues, because now we have hardware chips, we have the power behind the hardware platforms to support those sessions, to support that amount of bandwidth going through those firewalls, even with next-gen firewalls and next-gen feature sets that they have on it. But if you look at the shift in the IT landscape and how we've gone from simplistic networks to very complex data centers, and there's particular hardware for particular areas of a data center, or particular hardware that you need for wireless, or sort of fabric connections for storage, or whatever it might be, it really helps kind of put all that together from a fabric point of view. Accessing cloud applications in the cloud, hybrid infrastructure. Some people have data centers locally; they're using the cloud. Be able to use, let's say, applications hosted in Amazon and using that infrastructure. Remote users really has been top of mind for a lot of us, and that's really where those challenges come in. So if we look at the current pandemic and the issues that we have with remote users, how do we protect the unknown? How do we protect the people we don't have visibility in? How do we keep our environment safe but still keep business running, because the network is the business? And a lot of times security really isn't budgeted correctly. A lot of times someone has to get hacked, or a threat, or something has to get stolen in order for someone to raise an eye and notify that this is a problem and we have to fix this. So where's my funding, right? And how do you keep up with the excessive threats and issues we have on an ongoing basis when it comes to networks now? Back in the day, we'd say, hey, let's ghost a machine. Simple as that, right? We lost the data, we lost it. But now people need to be held accountable for those things. And how do we secure those connections? How do we keep the software up to date? How do we track these devices if it left the country or where they're accessing from? And these are true challenges now because of the compliance, or the data being leaked. And coming from an offensive security point of view in my history, the approach that vendors are taking today on how to protect themselves is wrong. Everybody takes this product pitch of why my product's better in the industry, and personally, and me being frank, it's wrong. And the reason why, because as a hacker, either being using scripts or using an OS like Parrot or Kali Linux or whatever it might be from a pen testing perspective, they have their own framework of how they do things, either it being information gathering to exploitation, post-exploitation, pivoting, whatever it might be. And that's just from discovery. There's different ways of doing wireless. There's different ways of doing things in different areas, from hardware to testing. And they are very organized as far as how they take approach of taking over or pivoting or getting access to something. And the approach for most vendors has always been, buy my product. I'll fix that, of course, right? And I don't want to take that approach. The one thing I do like about Cisco is that we took a zero trust model, which I wholeheartedly believe in. So forgive me, I'm very passionate about this, because it really marks the place of making it very difficult for people or things falling in the wrong hands, right? So there are three different pillars to that. There's the workforce, workload, and workplace. And if you look at workforce, it means those remote users, those people that need access to that cloud application or that data center to be able to see what are those users' devices that you have out there. Workload being that data center environment, the applications and how we're protecting those, as well as visibility into how those things are interacting and segmentation. And you also have workplace, which might be your office, right? Where you have the majority of your network traffic, mobile devices, internal traffic, users and devices internal to a network, from a network perspective. And these, from an offensive pen tester background, I look at these areas, and these, from a layout perspective, is how I would go about trying to identify how do I get into this environment. It might be social engineering. It might be compromising a mobile device, an IoT device, or discovery and figuring out how to ping scan or do traffic analytics. And then once I have access to the inside, I may gain access to a machine that doesn't really matter to me, but how do I use that machine as a jump point for things internally? And all those are threats and problems that a hacker would use to be able to identify a breach. And me coming from that background, I hate buzzwords like breach defense or what vendors have made up, right? But if you look at those things, I could social engineer a person, target a particular identity of a person, and it could be from dating a person to getting to know a person on social media like LinkedIn, create a fake profile, and identifying what they do, right? And let's say, for example, it's a marketing girl, and I'm not a good-looking guy anyway, but I start flirting with this particular person, and I identify what applications that person is using to be able to send out marketing information or whatever. But even in that marketing information, it has your information. You as the customer of DataVox or a potential customer of DataVox now, I can identify who you guys are. And once I were able to maybe social engineer, use phishing attacks or whatever it might be, going into your environment, I may gain access to a particular device. Maybe it being a handheld that you use in an industrial control center, maybe it being a phone and me putting a droplet in a phone and listening to all your conversations. So there's a reason. There's a methodology of that. And what we have to do in this security fabric of things is to identify how do we prevent risk, right? Is it hardware? Is it software? Is it a solution? Is it an approach or a framework? And then more importantly, if you guys have ever heard me speak at any of my presentations, either it being a con or Cisco Live or being Black Hat or whatever, what I find the most important thing about being proactive in a security environment is visibility. Visibility is always going to be my first go-to in any type of environment to identify what flows and how do things communicate in the infrastructure. And by identifying that, let's say we use a traditional environment, you got a voice VLAN, data VLAN, or whatever it might be, we need to be very specific on how do people interact with that voice VLAN. And who does that voice VLAN communicate with on the outside? So understanding those flows, because as a hacker, I'm doing that for you. And I need to identify how to sniff that traffic, how to understand your environment for you so that I can steal information from you. And more importantly, we need to be able to reduce that attack surface. So once we understand those flows, do we have the capabilities to contain and stop that attack lateral movement in those environments by using your current infrastructure with tools that allow us to mitigate things, quarantine, or have the access to be able to clean it or remediate those things or be able to build honeypots, right? So Cisco, which I'm very proud to announce, has built their own way of approaching this. And if I look at this, we have something called Cisco ZeroTrust. And in these three pillars that I truly do believe in, it's a good start to identifying and remediating issues in a workforce environment really helps. So we have workforce, workplace, and workload. Workforce, ensuring not only the right users, but the right devices have access to the environment and that they only have access to the applications in that environment. In a workplace, we want to make sure that those devices that we're able to authenticate are able to work and that they have the correct posture, right? And if they fall out of an anomalous point of view or out of compliance, that we're able to block, quarantine, or give them access in a local environment and even clean them based on malware remediation and mitigation. But more importantly, do we have the access to understand the visibility of how things are communicating within all the environments and that we're securing those connections internally and externally? Today, we are just going to focus on the workforce portion. And if you guys are interested in joining our two other webinars regarding workplace and workload, I do encourage it because I want to personally teach you guys on how it all works together. It's impossible to do it in one presentation because I want to be able to take the approach of showing you from a very detailed perspective of how it fits together. But when you look at Zero Trust, it really is just that. It really is just taking the perspective of I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody, any device, any user, regardless if you're my best friend, my CEO, or whatever it might be. As we all know, as we talked about before, social engineering, spear phishing. There's various different ways that we can grab information from people and use that against them, even though it wasn't their fault. So we just take the approach of we don't trust anybody. But there are pillars that you have to go through in order to gain trust and to earn trust in an environment to get access to what you need. If you go back to the 1980s that I was talking about before, we have a Bay network or Cabletron or whatever it might be. I plug into that hub. I had access to everything. Hell, I could even do a sniffer and see all the traffic on that network. We've seen the evolution of networks gained by switches and being able to use firewalls and various other security technologies out there. And now, today, in today's environment, we have security controls integrated into an infrastructure. It could be your Cat9Ks, it could be your routers, it could be your firewalls, it could be your endpoints. The fact that we have so many different layers of security, instead of making it complex, let's make it simple. Let's use a framework that allows us to defend against these problems and threats that we have coming into a network, users or pivots or whatever it might be, with your current investment of your infrastructure. And by doing that, first thing is we need to allow devices to gain trust. And once you've established trust, then we can give privilege or access to those resources that you have within your environment, depending on who you are. Once you are there, we need to be able to continuously monitor who you are and what you have access to, and make sure that at all times that we're Big Brother and that we're watching what you do. And if you do anything that is out of normal or not in compliance to what you're supposed to do, that we set in action. And I'm a big, big advocate on what I call SOAR, and SOAR being a security orchestration automation response. And that really is the future of Zero Trust as well as other vendors, and also for our partners. And what SOAR is, allows us to take a framework that we're talking about right here and take the load off the person. Be able to say, all right, if a threat happens, let's say a user plugs into a network and tries to gain access, they automatically can't gain. But what do I need to do? I need to do something further about it. SOAR as a platform in a Zero Trust environment allows us to automate threats. Let's say that person did gain access. Just because they gained access from a workforce perspective doesn't necessarily mean that what the traffic he's sending is legit. If, and it's a playbook environment, if he sends traffic that is a threat or has an issue, then we need to be able to automate that threat, either being a syslog information or a SIM tool or some way to interact with it and be able to counterattack it. And the counterattack it meaning create a rule or reroute their traffic, or the device trust for that particular user has been disabled and they're quarantined into a particular environment, and be able to visualize and create reports. And this could be as simple as a report that you get in WebEx Teams. Let's say you had a bot that has the orchestration behind all this, and it comes to you in a service desk like ServiceNow or whatever, or comes to you in a voice or a video or whatever, or a written message in WebEx Teams that says, hey, Tom, we saw this threat. We sent it to AMP Threat Grid for analysis, and based on your playbook, we went and blocked it, and here's your report on how the machines got infected, how it came into the network. In a perfect world, that's where we all want to be. And that's where we really want to grow the Zero Trust framework in the future. But today we want to focus on just the workforce portion, okay? And from a workforce perspective, what that means is that we want to be able to ensure that the right users and their devices have access to the network regardless of the access method, and that they only have the correct access to those particular applications. So for example, I'll use the energy corridor. If I was in a class 1 Div 2 type of environment, and I have a wireless environment out in that class 1 div 2 environment, and I need to access on my IoT device, the applications or the gauges or the PLUs or whatever it might be to enter in data or create data sheets, right? And this, since it's a private network, but we don't want other devices to join, or maybe you do, but they have to go through a trust process, we want to make sure that when they authenticate, either it being by thumbprint or biometrics or it being an SSO log in the Active Directory, that they have access to that device or a range of devices, and that they only have access to the applications that they have. God forbid that anyone actually goes out there and has access to those areas, meaning that, someone does a thumbprint and kind of fakes it, does a social engineering hack in that environment, and was able to gain access to that area, then depending on their authentication would have access to those applications, but we would have visibility into what they were doing. And at that point, we could determine on that visibility, how do we enforce policies, right? Since you're a trusted user, a trusted device, and you have access to those particular applications, do we trust what you do? And that's really where device health really matters, because a lot of times, in order to gain access to those areas, you have to tamper with those devices. And tampering with those devices might mean the USB port, or getting access to changing the drivers to something, or modifying the kernel, or whatever it might be. And we want to make sure that we can prevent devices from going into that particular environment. And that's really where I want to introduce Aaron to kind of come into this conversation now, because Duo, being a product that here at Cisco we offer, really kind of takes stronghold of that workforce. Because from a workforce, what we're saying is, as I gain trust from a device and a user, from a perimeter point of view, gaining access, I need to be able to go through a process and understand how or what I need to do to get access to this particular environment, and what do I have access to, and then what features I have to prevent me from getting access because I don't follow this particular compliance that I set out. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, and we'll tag team back and forth. But Aaron, if you'd like to continue, feel free.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. So yeah, we're going to focus on Duo providing zero trust for the workforce. And, the whole concept of multi-factor authentication, it's not a new concept. There's actually a very long history of MFA. But I'd say that, Duo, we were founded a little over 10 years ago with the purpose to make MFA easy. And so, you can see the screenshot here of the Duo push, right? That was, a technology that we pioneered because, traditional MFA offerings, are very, very complex, can be very onerous to set up. And we really set out to make that easy. And so, as I'm talking about Duo, I really want to talk about some of the differentiators because, even today, there's a lot of other MFA offerings that are out there and, that offer similar type of, what we call push capabilities. But Aaron also talked a lot about the device piece as well. And, MFA solves for, some of these pain points that you see here, right, in terms of, phishing, right? The majority, even today, the majority of data breaches are as a result of successful phishing attempts. Somebody sends a spear phish to an executive, or they're getting really good at duping the users into clicking on malicious links, or revealing your passwords and your credentials. So multi-factor authentication itself is the number one method to really curb down your phishing attempts. But Aaron talked a lot about the device piece, and this is a huge differentiator for Duo because your regular other MFA offerings are just going to focus on the user aspect, verify the user is who they say they are, and then they kind of wash their hands of it, and you're off to the races, right? With Duo, we're able to take that a step further and verify the device itself, whether it's the health of the device, and it really provides your the IT administrator really powerful tools and policies such that they could, block malicious devices, or they could, block personally owned devices. It really takes user access to the next level when we start talking about the device capabilities. Because, insecure devices, that's another huge vector that attackers are leveraging to access your environment. So, when we talk about zero trust, I think Aaron kind of alluded to this. It's a journey, right? That's how we look at it. It's not necessarily something that, you're going to forklift or implement all at once. And chances are you might already have some components, in place today that you could apply towards a zero trust environment. So when we talk about, zero trust from a workforce perspective, it's, establishing that trust, getting visibility into who's accessing your applications and your data, what sort of devices that they're leveraging, and then implement multi-factor authentication to verify the user is who they say they are, right? That basic multi-factor authentication. Then from there, once you verify who the user is, then you want to take that to the next level and start to implement policies around the devices that are accessing your environment, and making sure that those devices are meeting your policies, making sure that those devices are secure and that they meet your security policies. So as we see here, this is the Duo push that we pioneered, designed to be extremely easy for an end user to use, but also as an administrator, it makes it very easy to integrate Duo with all of your applications and provide a consistent experience to, again, really make it seamless. Our approach is to make security easy and not a blocker, because if it gets in the way of the user, it's unproductive, and they're going to try to find ways to get around that. So in terms of our device trust piece, we're going to verify that those devices are trustworthy, and I'll actually get to that here in a moment. So I talked a lot about the Duo push that we pioneered that leverages an application on your cell phone, or you can use wearables like Apple Watches today. But we also support a whole host of other authentication methods as well. Some use cases here, especially for like the energy corridor, if you're maybe offshore oil rig, maybe doesn't have internet access, or maybe you're in a call center where cell phones aren't allowed or something like that, we can provide a variety of authentication methods, even for offline authentication. So for some of those specific use cases that might be relevant for energy corridor. Aaron, if you'll jump to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Duo was designed to be easy to use, really trying to get away from like token-based, kind of the old method where IT had to spend a lot of time enrolling tokens and that sort of thing. Also make it easy for end users to self-enroll if you like, and to also enlist end users to help make sure that their devices are secure. So that helps reduce the burden on IT and trouble tickets in terms of helping to educate end users to make sure that their devices are up to date and that they're maintaining healthy security hygiene on their actual devices. So and importing users, and we integrate with Active Directory, just again make it really, really easy to establish that trust at the user level. So in terms of device trust, a big differentiator is that we provide visibility into the endpoints that are accessing your environment without an agent, which is really important for a lot of our customers. A lot of end users don't want to install agents on their systems. They don't want to install MDM on their personal phones. So we enable that visibility without agents, and then also we integrate with a lot of mobile device management solutions, such that you can set policies where if a device isn't enrolled in your MDM solution, then you can block those devices. So if you've got an environment where you're not, you don't want to allow personal devices, or maybe for compliance reasons, you don't want to allow personal devices, we enable that with Duo, so you can have only trusted devices that are accessing your environment. Aaron, if you'll jump to the next one. So as I mentioned earlier, right, it's helping to enlist your end users in kind of the fight against cyber crime. And this gives you a snapshot of what the Duo push looks like, where a policy was set such that maybe it was an operating system or a browser that's out of date. And as an administrator, you can block those types of devices that are out of date. But you see that button on there that says "Let's update it," and then if you were to click that, that would then direct the user to a website or a resource that would educate them on how to update their device, and how to make sure that device is up to date, whether it's sending them to the browser page to update their plugin, or maybe the OS is out of date. This personally happened to me last week. I use a Mac, and the latest Mac OS on my system was out of date, and I wasn't able to access an internal corporate resource, so I had to go and update that. And it was easy to click and see, okay, it's Mac iOS or OS 15 dot whatever, and made it very easy for me to update that. And then once that update was placed, I was able to get access to that resource. So as I mentioned earlier, we provide access to all sorts of different applications. Pretty much anything with a login, we can provide secure access for. Multiple applications, and another big differentiator for us is that it's cloud applications. It could be custom or on-premise legacy applications that we can provide protection for, as well as we talked about cloud applications, VPNs, you name it. Aaron, if you'll jump ahead to the next one, I think we talked a little bit more about some of the applications. And then in terms of our policies, which is really powerful for our customers, is that we're also able to get really granular in terms of the policies that we enable you to build for your environment. So, for example, maybe certain applications, you're okay with a lower security posture, like maybe the company cafeteria menu or something like that, compared to a sensitive financial database, right? So you can set these policies either at a role-based level, based on an individual user or even a group of users. You can set them based on applications that are being accessed. You can also set them based on devices. Maybe you don't want personally owned devices accessing certain applications. Very, very granular in terms of how we enable you to provide policy-based access controls within the Duo framework. Aaron, if you'll jump to the next one. So these were some of the applications that I wanted to speak to. Kind of if you start on the left-hand side of the slide, that's where a lot of our customers start there in terms of protecting your VPN for remote access. Very important. We're seeing tremendous uptick in this in terms of the whole shift to remote work given the whole COVID situation. So that's kind of the easy low-hanging fruit is protect that access, secure access to your VPNs. And then from there, you can, expand and be able to protect additional applications, right? Whether it's, protecting your cloud applications with Duo SSO that's included in our product, or, protecting Microsoft applications. That's a big use case. And then, as I mentioned, we can also protect on-premise, custom applications. We've got, tremendous amount of documentation out there in terms of, using our publicly available APIs and SDK and that sort of thing. So that's another big differentiator for us is our breadth of coverage. So, and then the Duo single sign-on, this is included in all of our editions as well. So this provides that secure single sign-on access for your cloud applications. We've actually had some really good customer success stories where we had one particular customer that had a really tight time frame, like 8 weeks, to move all of their users to these cloud applications. It was like 3,500 users, and they were able to do that within the time frame. Made it very easy for them to migrate their users, easy for their users to enroll, and provided that level of security that they needed with all of our policy-based access controls. So really powerful use case there with SSO. And then what Aaron's showing here on the screen is a snapshot of our of the management console within Duo, and you can see a lot of visibility into the devices that are accessing your environment. So this gives you a snapshot of the operating systems by platform that are accessing your environment. And again, a lot of visibility here in terms of what are their end-of-life devices? Are there out-of-date devices? We actually had a healthcare provider implement Duo, and using this device insight, they literally found over 30,000 devices that were accessing their environment that they had no visibility to prior, and roughly 50% of those devices were out of compliance. So just based on those sorts of insights there, they were able to reduce that security risk and make sure that those devices couldn't access it and or make sure that they were up to date and within policy. So, Aaron, did you want to speak or dig deeper into this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one part I wanted to speak about this particular one is, as a security analyst, you look at these views. Sometimes you look and you think to yourself, what devices do I have connected to my network? Are they in compliance or are they not? How many of them are out of date, and which ones are are allowed or not allowed? Or if they are allowed, should they be allowed, right? And the whole thing about zero trust also is being able to not only see the details, but forcing them to be able to have that additional layer of security when they gain access to an environment is, I know it's annoying for me sometimes to have to, in order to check my email, I have to do a thumbprint, an eye check, blood check, or whatever it might be. But in a mission critical environment, that might be needed, right? Where biometrics is probably a very important part of that. But then also, as we see the visibility into these devices, we can create policies based off based off based off that information. Should we allow them to have access, even if they authenticated correctly? For example, their laptop is not full whole disk encrypted, so that's a violation. Should we still allow them to have access, right? And if we talk about the energy world, right, and maybe we're scared about a laptop having a USB port or some type thing or something open that can steal data from the local network, we can make sure, hey, you got to have these parts, disabled, or you have to have some type of device or software that disables that. And also just making sure that they have the traditional or correct software in order to gain access to those particular environments. So that is very important from a zero trust perspective, and creating policies based off that, and saying, that workflow that I see, if I'm in this environment, I should have access to this application. But not just that, is this device corporate owned? Is this part of the device list that has that certificate on that particular device in order for me to have access to this environment? And if so, then there might be certain things I want to enforce on that particular device. I have to make sure it's not jailbroken. I have to make sure it's whole disk encrypted, and that if they are gaining access to that particular device, that they are doing biometrics. They are doing string log. And if I look at the energy world, sometimes there's these kiosks, right, that are hidden in certain areas that do monitoring, or they can do checking of gauges or whatever it might be in that type of environment, that you might want to force people, even though it's a shared device, to do biometrics, right? And even in some of these areas, most important to me, being in the energy industry myself in the past lifetime, is there was always this contractor that had a database or a software that controlled this stuff. And even as expensive it was, they weren't a huge company, or maybe they were, we don't know. But the point being, it was an application they created, and they need remote access. So what we did in the past is we built a VPN, we limited the IP address to whatever IP their contractor came from or whatever. But I always wanted to do more. I wanted to ensure that when they had access to the network, they didn't have access to everything, because they did. And I really, from a device and from a user perspective, I just had to trust. Just out of hand, I just had to trust they weren't going to do anything wrong. But now, with verifying trust in devices and using the current investment you have in infrastructure, we can determine what they have access to based on roles, right? And based on what they have on roles gives us the capability to determine what they can download, what they can't, what they have access to, and et cetera. And as Duo and Cisco creates the security fabric of things that work together, right? That we're adding more features that came from Cisco into the Zero Trust, like AMP, for example. And being that Duo with AMP for endpoints is such an important aspect because we want to be able to block or quarantine or look at malware as it goes through these devices, not just get device trust, but by the way, I'm going to allow AMP for endpoints to be able to block compromised endpoints out there, because even though you verified trust, doesn't mean what you're sending is trusted. So it's important that we still monitor the visibility of what's going on in that particular environment, right? So when you look at how users access an application, if you don't have some type of tool that's monitoring the malware coming in and out of it, we need to be able to have Duo notify the security fabric infrastructure and say, hey, we might be seeing something that's not normal. We might be seeing something that's out of compliance. Do you want to load automated to a response of this particular workflow? And we can load AMP or scan traffic either being through a firewall or being on the endpoint, where then at that point, if we notice that it's doing something abnormal or something that's against the policies that we created, that we now are scanning those SHAs and blocking those SHAs as it's going through those workflows. Because just because my device is trusted and has access to a particular application that I'm allowed to have does not mean the data I'm sending necessarily is trusted, right? And I'm going to let Aaron speak to this, but just to add some flavor here, as it comes all together, and what I mean by security fabric is that there are three pillars: the workforce, workplace, workload, and these different areas have ICE, they have NAC, they have wireless, wireless mitigation attempts, and various different things are included in the security fabric. It's important that we understand that it all works together, either from an automated point of view or from an API perspective. That it's important that we understand that it's not just Duo, it's not just ICE, it's not just the firewall, it's the fabric of how it works together. But Aaron, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to add, Aaron, that as I mentioned earlier, it's a journey here, right? And so, don't be, it can maybe seem daunting in terms of the fabric and all the information that we're talking about here, but it's about getting that visibility, establishing that user trust with MFA, and then, assessing your policies and implementing policies around how your users and devices are accessing your environment, and then just continuously verifying that. And hopefully what you saw today is that we provide a lot of the tools that make this easy to implement and easy to continuously be monitoring and verifying your environment. So yeah, thanks, Aaron.
Absolutely. So if we look at this particular slide and move on to the next one, is location, device type, network type, right? So we talk about location and say, depending if you're on site, if you're remote or whatever it might be, there's an infrastructure that you would have to implement in order to get stuff to work, depending on what you have in your environment, right? If it's as simple as, hey, VPN, gaining MFA access to the particular environment behind that firewall, great. Now we do device trust. It may use that firewall to be able to do the extra security controls, but everything talks and communicates with each other. But what about legacy apps, right? What about other things that you have out there that may not be in the cloud, right? So Duo and Cisco obviously have proxies that we can use from a proxy auth perspective to be able to authenticate into those legacy applications. They have other software solutions that allow us to integrate into Windows Active Directory and cloud applications, and it does have direct integration to a lot of other cloud applications from an API perspective. And as you use the YubiKeys, as you use the biometrics or whatever it might be, it is cloud-based. So there is no hardware you have to install anywhere local. You can be anywhere in the world and still get a push or use your two-factor MFA authentication in order to gain access, right? So let's kind of go over what those use cases are. So Aaron, do you want to talk about the remote access part?
Yeah, certainly. So, I'll kind of give a real-world example here. We had a multinational corporation that needed to provide access to remote workers from all over the globe, including contractors, third-party vendors, that sort of thing. And they were able to implement Duo and be able to provide initially that provide them that visibility in terms of, what sort of devices and users were attempting to access their environment, and then they were able to implement policies based on location, based on type of role, such that they were able to meet their security policies that they had set. And this was a multinational company that had a lot of regulations that they had to adhere to, and we were able to help them satisfy those compliance requirements with all the different access policies that we were able to allow them to implement. I'll kind of speak to this one as well. I think I might have shared this one a little bit earlier, but this is actually a public reference. Sophos, the security company, they had the project where within a couple of weeks, they needed to migrate their users from some of the on-prem and legacy applications. They had a project to move that all to their cloud-based infrastructure. And so we were able to help them do that. They had thousands of users that they needed to enroll and needed to onboard and enable them to securely access this their new cloud infrastructure. And we were able to do that with the Duo single sign-on solution, the Duo Access Gateway that's included in some of the Duo offerings. So some real-world use cases there.
And in this particular use case, when we talk about energy or ICS or industrial controls, Cisco, going back to that whole fabric, has a vision of it, right? So it might be based on workload, workflow, or various different products that you may or solutions that have in that environment. But Duo really has an important spot, an important area. In this particular use case, we had an environment where, going back to that server that they had to load somewhere locally with a firewall in front of it, they gave a VPN tunnel or a public website static NAT going to that particular machine is scary, because in a lot of cases they might put a cable modem, they might put a DSL or whatever out there to be able to gain access to that small environment, usually a very small firewall, even though it's a big industrial environment. We just didn't trust it, right? That's scary to me, just opening holes to the internet, even if it's particular to this one IP address out there on the internet, that we then at that point had multiple users from different areas. It was very hard to manage people coming in to administer that server, because all the end user or customer cares about is, hey, does it work? If it doesn't, someone needs to fix it. And then the security is almost an afterthought on how do I secure this, right? And the VPN MFA was great, but then addressing roles and based on location on how they can access that environment was critical. And being able to say, well, we only trust this certain level of devices, and if you don't have this level of compliance, that you're not allowed into this environment, even if it's remotely, right? And then more importantly, they had to add them to their internal SSO or their internal Active Directory in order to gain that access. And that really just kind of eliminated a lot of those pains and administration points that we had that was involved in that type of environment. So for example, you could have that gateway set up. You could have that connected to your SAML or your identity provider, and say when you do get clientless access to that particular website or that particular VPN or whatever it might be, that even though it's restricted to one IP address, we're still going to have you authenticate. We still want you to have a push. We still want you to have that right code, because if someone did have access to that public website or spoofed your IP address for whatever reason, or saw your website open at your location at your call center, that they still have to provide that authentication, right? And make sure that that device still meets compliance in order to reach that particular application. And even then, that's not a silver bullet, right? And that's really kind of where I integrate the other part of Zero Trust into that called workloads, because it's important to have visibility. It's important to understand what's communicating with each other, because in a perfect world, sure, everybody's protected, but we don't live in a perfect world. And it's important that we see how things are accessing online, and we build what we call these virtual policies in a product such as maybe like Penetration, right? Or StealthWatch, where we build these compliance policies and say, if I make a credit card authentication access, or this gauge is monitoring this, but for whatever reason, this is accessing another database that it's not supposed to, maybe it's a bug in the code. Maybe it's someone that got, malware. Maybe it's someone that is that hacked that machine, but we need to have those alerts. We cannot wait to be reactive in those type of environments to let us know, oh, hey, we were hacked. We need to do something about it. We need to know about these things in real time. And that's kind of where I still fit SOAR into this, where if it happens in real time, we build that playbook and be able to say we need to address that. And really, that's kind of why I think workforce and workload and this whole fabric works together, because we need to be able to have that dashboard, right? That dashboard that gives us the visibility, the automation to look at those forensic rules and automate segmentation based off those, based on threat, risk, scoring, how they're accessing things, if they're in violation of a compliance, and really where it ties into the whole framework of other things, either being SD access or being ICE to remediate things from a NAC perspective, or using firewalls for visibility. It's important that we're logging and then auditing everything in real time. So to summarize a lot of the things that we went over, obviously, Zero Trust covers so many different pillars, right? Workforce, workload, workplace. And we kind of went over how workload and workforce kind of fit together. But since it does have an API integration to everything altogether, and even third parties out there from an integration point of view, that is important to know that this isn't just one product. It is a solution, right? And as a solution, we go out there and we get able to integrate with different third parties or your current infrastructure that you have today, your current investment today, to get that visibility and to mitigate to block things out there. In order to do that. So Aaron, is there anything else you'd like to add from that perspective about the Duo partners or how they integrate to Duo?
No, I just call out, I think we're going to make all this available. Just go check out the Duo docs page. You can really get in-depth information on all these integrations on the Duo products, and just for yourselves how easy that is to integrate. So I think you nailed it, Aaron.
Yeah, and selfishly, even from a personal perspective, I use Duo at home from a personal perspective and say, hey, in order to access my Instagram, right, I want to have Duo. If you know me personally, I'm into this real big game called Mafia City on my iPhone, and you buy packs, you buy weapons to fight in this little virtual reality world. It's an investment for me personally, so I use Duo to make sure my account doesn't get hacked or anything like that. But you can also see, how does that relate to what we're doing here at work? Because if you're doing device trust, IoT, BYOD, or whatever in your work environment, if someone's hacking my game, then it's important to know that we have that Duo or that Zero Trust perspective in there to be able to force people to authenticate or have unauthorized access, that we're getting alerts and notifications on it. So again, I encourage everybody to please attend our next webinars, because I don't want you to attend today and go, hey, they just talked about one portion. That workforce and workload are also an important part of this fabric. And as you can see today, it took a while for us to get through it. And since this series is important to understand how they integrate with other products within Cisco and how to build this framework on protecting your environment regardless of the industry that you're in, that how we put the pieces together and how they work together. So please go to our Zero Trust website if you can't make it. But I highly do encourage all you guys to go to our upcoming webinars. So guys, if you want to take over and kind of mention what's coming up.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Yes, we do. As you can see on the screen there, we do have a couple more webinars coming up in this series for Zero Trust Framework for Workplace and workload. There we go. And also, what is cybersecurity incident response? These are every Wednesday for the next few weeks at 10 a.m. I did post the link to register in the chat there, as well as you can use that QR code on the page. Before we start to close out, Paul, did you have any questions or anything for the team?
Yes, I do actually. I know it's coming up on top of the hours. There are a couple questions, and one of them is extremely important. I think that I need to post it out here. One of the questions is the Zero Trust model limited to just Duo as a solution? So
no. Obviously, Duo fits into one pillar, which is the workforce, what we covered today. That's why I say encourage everybody to please come to the next couple of webinars, Workplace and Workload. To be selfish here from a Cisco perspective, obviously we have ICE, we have which is a NAC solution. We have ACI, which is from an enterprise networking perspective. We have Penetration and StealthWatch that do fit in this overall, security fabric that I was talking about earlier. So no, Duo kind of fits great in the workforce, remote access type of environment. Obviously, it does device health checking, et cetera. But as the security fabric develops, and even with third parties, that Zero Trust has a realm of different solutions that fit together in all different pillars. So no, it's not just Duo.
Great, thank you. The next question is, how does Zero Trust determine threats or any sign of indication of compromise after a device establishes trust?
So obviously Duo has integrations that work with several different products within Cisco, but just from a Duo perspective, obviously it has what I call NAC Lite, or access control light, based off the devices that we're determining trust, right? So if I have let's say a Microsoft Surface device, and I was able to authenticate and gain access to the network, obviously Duo is going to monitor the levels of, what has been modified, what has been changed within that particular device. And as I mentioned earlier, if it does monitor seeing something out of compliance or something weird or out of there, that obviously it will communicate with the Zero Trust model and be able to utilize the firewall or use AMP for endpoints or use other tools within it to visually see those threats and mitigate those, either being from a Duo perspective, quarantining that from a Duo perspective, or de-authing it, right? Or utilizing ICE, for example. If it's an internal device and ICE has control over that switch port or that wireless, LAN controller or whatever it might be, we can reroute traffic to a honeypot. We can quarantine users, whatever it might be. So the cool thing about it is that we can use a playbook, right? And in that playbook, determine how it's going to be mitigated. So Duo does have a certain level of access as far as what it can monitor, but it also does utilize the framework to use other tools to be able to mitigate things.
Okay, great. Thank you, Aaron, for answering those questions. We do actually have a couple more, but I think we're coming up to the top of the hours. We will answer those questions accordingly. Jessica, I'll hand it back to you.
That includes our session for today. Thank you so much to Aaron and the Cisco team for your time and a great presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.